Welcome everyone to our webinar today. This is the very last webinar of the year, and although 2020 has flown by fast, we are just excited to share some research and clinical updates that have occurred in 2020 in regards to research on LSVT-BIG and LSVT Loud. So welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your busy day to attend. My name is Laura Gousset. I'm a LSVT-BIG faculty, a physical therapist, and the Chief Clinical Officer of LSVT-BIG. And I'm joined by my colleague, Heather Hodges, a speech therapist. She's also LSVT Loud faculty and works for LSVT Global as our consultant and CE administrator. So you will be hearing from both of us in today's webinar. These are briefly our bios. I won't go through them extensively, and unless just to say that both Heather and I have extensive experience providing the LSVT-BIG and LSVT Loud treatments to individuals with Parkinson's and other neurological disorders. And if you're a therapist that is attending this webinar today and wants to self-report this for CEU purposes, the biographies are also included for you for that purpose. We always do like to acknowledge the funding support that has been made the research on LSVT Loud and LSVT-BIG possible throughout the years. And without this wonderful funding support and partnership from a number of organizations, such as these listed here, we wouldn't be here today providing you with this webinar and all the great evidence that supports these treatment protocols. I'm an employee of LSVT Global, and Heather is a consultant for LSVT Global, and we receive lecture honorarium. We also have a non-financial relationship, including a preference for LSVT Loud and LSVT-BIG as treatment techniques. Now, you may have joined our webinars in the past, in fact, maybe many of them, but if you haven't, here's just some brief logistics. This webinar is being recorded right now, so that if you want to go back and review it, or if you want to share it with a friend or a colleague, it'll be uploaded to our blog, which is blog.lsvtglobal.com. And we have a whole section of many on-demand webinars that have been recorded. So we'll upload the handout and also the webinar recording in case you want to go back and listen to it again. That usually takes us a couple of days. So if you want information on that, just let us know. In your control panel, there is a section that says handouts. If you open that, you'll see that the handout has been uploaded to the webinar. We'll also email that to you as well. Just know that there is a typo in one of the links that Heather will point out at the end. So it relates to one of our projects called Project Euphonia. But the handout you'll get an email is a corrected URL, and also the handout that we'll upload to our blog will be the corrected handout as well, in case you're listening to this webinar as an on-demand attendee in the future. So the majority of this hour is going to be spent presenting the content. However, there will be time at the end to address your questions. Most people type in their questions into the question or chat box on your control panel, and you can start doing that at any time. You don't have to wait to the end. We'll answer as many of those questions as we can in first come, first serve order. Please do keep them on topic because we have a lot of ground to cover for today's webinar. There will be also an opportunity for you to ask your question out loud at the end of the webinar, and we'll go through some instructions later on how to do that. But for right now, everyone's microphones are muted so that there's no background noise from all of our various environments. At the end of the webinar, either as you log off or through an email, there'll be an opportunity to complete a survey about today's webinar. We always really value your feedback about the content, the audio and video quality, anything that we might want to know to make our future webinars better, or tell us what you really liked about the webinar, because that is helpful too. If you have further questions or comments, there will be a space on that survey to add those as well. If you are a therapist that's attending our webinar today, here's some basic information on how to self-report your CE activity. These are not ASHA-registered or state-registered for CEUs for speech therapists, PTs, and OTs, but if your state allows for self-reported CEU, We will be able to provide you with a certificate if you would like that. Just contact us, email us at webinars@lsvtglobal.com, and we'll provide you an electronic certificate that has your name, the webinar title, date, and duration. Please do note that you have to attend for the full hour in order to earn that certificate. If you're an on-demand listener, there will be also a way for you to request a certificate for CE reporting. And again, email webinars@lsvtglobal.com. Our learning objectives today are these. We'll briefly review the foundational research on LSVT Loud and LSVT Big. We'll also describe a rationale for how this research supports and benefits not only clinicians, but patients as well. Most of our session today is going to be spent describing the new LSVT Big and LSVT Loud research studies that were published in 2020. At the end, we'll look at some future research directions and some clinical innovations that have been unique in the year 2020. So we're going to kick our webinar today off with a panel. We always like to know who is joining us. These public webinars are really open to anyone, whether they be therapists, persons with Parkinson's disease, caregivers, other healthcare professionals. So just give me a second to launch this poll, and it'll just take you a very brief time to answer that. So I've launched it. You should see it on your screen now. Just please select who you are. Just give you a couple more seconds. Looks like almost all of you have voted. Okay, and I'm going to close the poll. Almost everyone has voted. And it looks like, I'll share it here so you can see it, 30% of you are speech therapists, 44% of you are physical or occupational therapists, 15% are people with Parkinson's disease, and 11% are family, friends, or persons of people with Parkinson's disease. So thank you for sharing that with us. We try to keep the webinars broad enough so that it gives important information regardless of who you are. And just as a note, if you're an LSVT certified clinician that is joining us today, you may or may not know that we did research webinar updates. Yesterday we had one for LSVT Loud, and on Monday we had one for LSVT Big. So we went a little bit more in depth on some of the information that we'll be sharing today. If you'd like to access those webinars, they'll be uploaded to your LSVT clinician account shortly. So for those of you that aren't really familiar with LSVT Global and what we do, this is the heart of our mission. Our mission is to empower people with Parkinson's to restore and maintain their highest levels of communication, mobility, and independence with activities of daily living through these scientifically supported programs. And their LSVT Loud is the name of our speech therapy, and LSVT Big is the name of our physical and occupational therapy that LSVT Global developed and has been researching over the years. And for you therapists, you all know that evidence-based practice is so important for what we do as therapists, and really having confidence in knowing that what the services that we'll be providing and the treatment we'll be providing will be effective. So it's really a partnership. It takes a team approach. It takes an approach of the researchers themselves, the therapists who then go out and deliver the treatments that are developed and researched in these studies, and also the patients to be aware of the different treatment options for them that are evidence-based so that they can get the best care possible. So let's start off with just a brief overview of how does this research benefit people with Parkinson's disease, because that is really the heart of the matter, is getting research into the hands of people with Parkinson's whose lives will be impacted. Otherwise, clinical treatment research is really meaningless if it just stays in the ivory tower of the research world. So if you're a person with Parkinson's or a caregiver joining us, of course, it offers clear expectation of treatment requirements and potential outcomes. So if you have published studies on something like LSVT Loud and LSVT-BIG that demonstrate its efficacy, you can have a level of confidence that, gosh, if I do this the way that the research study outlined it, I also should expect positive outcomes. It gives you confidence that this repetition of training and intensity and calibration are really required to drive brain changes. And so, at first blush, these intensive treatments can seem like, wow, that's a lot of work, that's a lot of time commitment for me. But through the research studies, we know that it's not only important for you physically to improve your strength or your balance, your voice, but it really has the potential to improve your brain function. And third, it allows you to advocate for practices, so therapy practices that prioritize and offer evidence-based therapy treatments. When you know what the research says, and as a customer, you're looking for who do I go and see that can provide me with the most up-to-date, evidence-based, cutting-edge care, you have some information to arm you so that you can ask good questions. And it protects you financially, physically, and emotionally by participating in treatments that have established efficacy versus those that are, potentially ineffective actually because we don't have the research data to support them. For you as therapists, you know that there's a lot of reasons, and we've outlined the top 6 reasons that this research helps you if you're an LSVT certified clinician. It gives you assurance that you're providing your patients with treatments that work. And as a therapist myself, I know that unsettling feeling of providing a treatment to someone that doesn't have evidence behind it and hoping that it helps your patient, but not really having that confidence and backing of published research. So it also gives you confidence in providing an intensive treatment, which has adequate repetition of practice and includes those elements that are so crucial for people with PD, such as sensory calibration, that we know is needed for lasting changes. And we know through multiple randomized control trials, there is a cause and effect relationship between the treatment delivered and the outcomes measured. And the randomized controlled trials are quite good. We'll look at them briefly, but they control for factors that influence treatment outcomes, such as attention, dosage, bias, etc. And the fourth reason is it dispels concern of research bias. There have been many studies published on LSVT-BIG and LSVT Loud that are independent. They've been published from multiple laboratories around the globe, and so we have external validity of these research results. It supports core components. These are solid neural-based treatments that apply all the principles of neuroplasticity and motor learning that can benefit people with other conditions such as stroke, MS, and cerebral palsy. And in fact, a couple of the studies that I'll be highlighting today look at this very thing. And lastly, it gives you confidence that technology, such as the companion or telehealth, does not diminish the effectiveness of LSVT Loud. And Heather will be going through some of those research studies, both present and future as well. So it's really been a journey over the last 30 years. And I'm going to turn it over to Heather now, and she's just going to walk you through this journey and a couple of slides on the foundational research on LSVT Loud.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction, Laura, and the direction that we're going to be taking this afternoon or morning, depending on where you're joining us from, is so exciting. And it really did all begin over 30 years ago with phase 1 and phase 2 research that really was the invention of LSVT Loud in the beginning, and eventually LSVT-BIG as well. Stage 1 and stage 2 worked on protocol development, and then getting into the later phases of the research in phase 3, we looked at randomized control trials for both treatments. Those randomized control trials established treatment efficacy, so the fact that we know these treatments work, and also the clinical implementation of the treatments to include application to other populations beyond Parkinson's disease. How to use technology to make therapy most accessible to the most people out there, and also investigation into a spread of effects that occurs in LSVT loud, where voice is the treatment target in therapy, but gains in articulation, gesture, intelligibility, breath support, intonation, and even neurological changes observed on PET scans have been documented post-treatment and further investigated. So it really has been a comprehensive 30-year look into the invention, scale up, and really understanding why these therapies work. And we're excited to shed some more light on that. When we look at some of the initial studies with LSVT loud, and the evidence for it, I wanted to briefly go over the 3 randomized control trials for LSVT. We will see 3 graphs here that have data plotted for each of the randomized control trials. In the first, you'll see that we examined what was at the time the classic speech treatment for Parkinson's disease, which was respiratory therapy. It is in the red color on the graph, and you'll see that we looked at it versus up against the voice and respiratory focused LSVT loud, which is represented on the graph in blue. You can see that from pre-therapy, the groups were at roughly the same loudness or decibel level, and post-therapy, and then up to 2 years after therapy, it was concluded that only the LSVT loud group got louder and maintained louder voice and easier to understand speech. This was replicated in the second graph, in the second study, noting those gains lasting at least 6 months post-therapy, with, again, LSVT loud in the blue and an untreated population in sort of the orange color. And then in the last, most recent randomized control trial, we examined whether intense targeting of voice via LSVT loud was special. Is voice something that's special and was causing the spread of effects that we observed not only in voice, but in articulation, intelligibility, facial expression, perhaps swallowing, etc. So we compared it to an identically intensive treatment that targeted articulation instead of voice. This is also the trial where we examined PET scan data in pre-therapy and post-therapy imaging and saw changes that may indicate neuroplasticity occurring after only 4 weeks of treatment. In the plot presented here, you can see that only those receiving LSVT loud had significant positive changes in loudness post-therapy and lasting over time. And so what these randomized control trials and the early research told us on the next slide here is that these studies were mattering and that the investigation into them, digging deeper, was important to help us understand what therapeutic targets work the best. It was not just activity or just speech instruction in general, that it was the specificity of activity mattering, that voice mattered. And thus far, our research would suggest that voice, targeting respiratory and laryngeal parts of the motor speech system, is truly special versus targeting only respiratory or articulatory targets. Additionally, that voice focus and sensory calibration addresses sensomotor integration deficits affecting the self-perception that patients have, feeling that their voice is loud enough and that normal loudness to them sounds too loud or sounds like a shout in people with Parkinson's disease. We also learned that LSVT loud may provide a cortically driven enhancement of the speech network, both sensomotor and from an auditory perspective. So that initial groundwork really is important, and I will be referring to that later when I speak more about the advances in the research we've made in 2020. I know Laura has similar data to review and to indicate why this matters from the LSVT-BIG perspective.
All right, thanks, Heather. So LSVT-BIG is a treatment that was derived from LSVT loud speech treatment, and so it's newer. Right now, we have 2 randomized control trials, and I'll just briefly share some information with you on them. In the first trial, and you can see this graph at the very top, LSVT-BIG was an intensive treatment that was delivered per protocol, so 4 times a week for 4 weeks. And it was compared to 16 visits of Nordic walking provided twice a week for 8 weeks and a home exercise program that individuals with Parkinson's did unsupervised for also the same duration and frequency of time as well. And so they compared what's called the UPDRS motor score as the primary outcome variable. And LSVT-BIG, which is the dashed line on the bottom, was the only treatment intervention that improved on that UPDRS motor score. The rater was blinded, so they didn't know which group that the patients were in. And also the amount of change between groups and the amount of change within the LSVT-BIG group was statistically and clinically significant. The Nordic walking group and the unsupervised home exercise program group stayed the same to got slightly worse over the course of the study, which was a length of 16 weeks long. In a second study conducted by the same research team, they compared LSVT-BIG, which is 16 visits, to a shortened training protocol, which is the same treatment but delivered in a lesser dosage of 10 visits. It was given 5 times a week for 2 weeks. And they compared the same thing again. And interestingly, in this study, they found that both groups made improvements in their mobility and their motor scores, is what we would say. However, the group that did the shortened training protocol did not perceive that they were very improved. In fact, 70.6% of the patients that were in LSVT-BIG said that they were very much improved or much improved. And of the ones that did the shortened training protocol, it was only about 16% or so that said that they were much improved or very much improved. And so what can we glean from this research? Again, what we do in therapy matters. It's not just any type of exercise or any type of therapy. We know that from these LSVT-BIG studies, we found that training amplitude, which is the size of your movements, actually causes you to move faster and more efficiently with your gait and transfers. We know from these studies that the intensive training and adequate repetition of practice is needed for what we call recalibration. So you understand what that bigger movement really feels like so that you can do it on your own at home too, even when the therapist isn't reminding you. And in the last study, we found that the lower intensity and unsupervised exercise programs from the first study may not be as beneficial for improving mobility or motor function in people with PD. So let's take a look first at what's new in LSVT-BIG research. And then I'll turn it over to Heather to give you a high-level overview of what's new in the LSVT loud research. Although this year has been terrible for so many reasons because of the pandemic, one of the wonderful things that happened was we had 5 new research studies on LSVT-BIG that were published by independent researchers in the year of 2020. So I'm not going to go into great detail. I have a lot of text here on the slides that'll be in your handout, and also the link if you'd like to read the articles yourselves. There's a couple of these articles that are open access, meaning that anyone can download it, access it, read it. So this first one is by Flood et al., published in 2020, and they looked at quantifying motor function. So normally in therapy, we use Clinical outcome measures such as tests like the sit to stand. The therapist might time her walking, doing a 10-meter walk or a timed up and go. They might do a variety of balance tests, but there always can be a little bit of a variability in subjectivity and how they rate it. So the reliability isn't always perfect. The researchers of the study had the idea of adding on body-worn sensors so that they would do these same tests like the timed 10-meter walk, the timed up and go, the sit to stand, the quiet stance, and finger tapping, just as they always would, but with the additional data that they would found from these body-worn sensors. So they wanted to see, can we pick up on things that we just can't pick up on through our normal testing that we do? And you can see the quote here from the author just says that it really expands what we can do in terms of the possibilities for helping to monitor people with PD before, during, and after LSVT-BIG. So in this study, they had 12 individuals that did LSVT-BIG, and they also had 2 control groups. They had 8 individuals with PD that didn't receive physical or occupational therapy, and then they had 14 healthy age-matched controls to perform the same therapeutic protocol. And they measured them in actually 8 recording sessions and up to 13 weeks after the completion of therapy. What they found through this study is that they found significant improvements in their 10-meter walk speed and their timed up and go times, as well as increased stride length. And that would concur with previous studies where we'd find similar improvements as well. No change was observed in their asymmetry of their gait or their variance. They were much faster with their sit-to-stand transfers, and they also found that the people in the control group that had PD that didn't exercise showed no improvement. So the treatment intervention really did make those improvements that wouldn't have normally been made. The gains were maintained at follow-up at 13 weeks, and they didn't pick up any improvements in their postural control or fine motor control in this study. So if you're a therapist or a patient, why does it matter? That's really the bottom line, is why does it matter and how are you going to integrate this into your practice? Like I said before, it really validates previous findings that show that there's this speed amplitude relationship. When we move bigger, it causes us to move faster at the same time. And these sensors picked up on that. It demonstrates the potential for these sensors to really help us as therapists to quantify changes, especially subtle changes that we see our patients, we know that we're making improvements. We can't always pick it up as an improvement in our outcome scores that we're using, but adding sensors that are more sensitive might add further validity to what we're doing as therapists. The second of the studies looked at what was called physiological evidence for proprioceptive recalibration, some really big, long words. But what we found in Parkinson's is that not only is there difficulties with moving, but it's a sensory deficit as well. People with Parkinson's tend to have difficulties estimating or judging distances or movement, perceiving if their posture is maybe listing to one side or forward, perceiving that one arm is not swinging as much as the other. And through LSVT-BIG, we address that. So we work on something called calibration training so that individuals not only know how to move bigger and how to generate bigger movements, but what that feels like. And that's a process called recalibration. In this study, 11 people underwent LSVT-BIG, and they were assessed at 4 weeks after LSVT-BIG, so immediately after, and then again at 8 weeks. And they measured their accuracy of a pointing task on the computer and also their passive position sense. Secondarily, they looked at their motor score on the UPDRS, the 9-hole peg test, which tests fine motor function, their drawing on a computer, and something called the PDQ-39, which tests quality of life. So after 4 weeks of LSVT-BIG, and even greater after 4 more weeks of continued practice on their own at home, their accuracy in pointing improved significantly. So it showed evidence of some improvements in their proprioception as compared to matched healthy controls. So it's good to know that LSVT-BIG does have some effects on proprioception, and this is really the first study to look at evaluating that in a more scientific way. They also showed improvements in their PDQ-39, so their quality of life, and they showed a trend towards improvements in their MDS-UPDRS score and their 9-hole peg test, but it did not reach statistical significance. So why does this matter? Again, it concurs with this theory of altered sensory motor integration in people with Parkinson's disease, and it lends support to this hypothesis that LSVT-BIG does retune proprioception through calibration training. And it's the first study to really look at this in this manner. We also have seen that continuous practice is important for continued improvements and maintenance. And I think that is so helpful to know that it really does matter if you're a person with Parkinson's that you continue to practice your LSVT-BIG exercises every day, even after therapy is over. This third study was a case report on a diagnosis that has not been assessed yet in terms of the effectiveness of LSVT-BIG. And so normal pressure hydrocephalus is a condition that has many similar symptoms to idiopathic Parkinson's disease in terms of gait instability and shuffling. So in this case study, they utilized the LSVT-BIG treatment and then followed the individual for a length of time and did some tune-up visits about 7 months later. They did a variety of outcome measures looking at balance, walking, the person's confidence with mobility activities, transfers, and a time floor transfer as well. This individual, although he had had NPH for 16 years, had multiple surgeries, shunt revisions, significant falling and mobility issues, his Berg balance score improved 20 points, which is a huge amount. His confidence on the ABC scale improved 45.9%. Those both were greater than the minimal detectable change. After he stopped going to therapy, he declined a little bit, but they did a tune-up session. They did, I think, 5 tune-up sessions, in fact, and he regained most of those scores again. He did improve his speed of his floor transfer, but he didn't show changes in his timed up and go or his 5 times sit to stand speed. And they said that this was a feasible treatment for him, that in his case it helped, but it would have been probably more helpful if they'd seen him sooner for his tune-up sessions and maybe seen him a little bit longer for his initial protocol. So it's exciting to know as therapists that LSVT-BIG has potential to help people that have diagnoses other than Parkinson's disease. But we have to be cautious. This is a single case study, so we can't generalize this and say that this helps all people with NPH for sure. The next study was also on a different diagnosis using LSVT-BIG on stroke, and this was the second study. The first one was a case study. This one was looking more at feasibility, so they enrolled 5 individuals who had had chronic stroke, and they went through LSVT-BIG delivered by an occupational therapist. The tests and measures they used were called the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure and the Wolf Motor Function Test, looking at upper extremity movement and function. And so let's take a look at the results here. They found that they lived in a very rural area, so they couldn't recruit everyone because of inability to come to the research center for some of the individuals. But for those that did come, they attended all of the sessions. So that was really helpful to know. And 4 out of 5 of them showed improvements in their function in daily life. And these were really relevant to what they were doing at home, such as opening drawers in the bathroom, getting around the kitchen, mobility activities, etc. And so just as a therapist, know that again, you can use LSVT-BIG on different populations, but we need more research, in particular on stroke. We know that there's a huge amount of people living in our world that are continuing to live with long-term impairments related to stroke. And it's exciting to know that an intensive treatment can even help people that have chronic stroke symptoms. And this last study was also an occupational therapy delivered study. It was a case study looking at the effects of LSVT-BIG on occupational performance. And Again, most of the studies that have been done on LSVT-BIG have been delivered by physical therapists and looking at more mobility measures, gait measures, balance measures. But what really matters for most people is, can I get around my house? Can I dress myself? Can I cook a meal? Can I do things that are task specific, that are important for me? And these occupational based measures really attempt to personalize that and quantify those improvements that are made from person to person. So they did find again that there was clinically meaningful change on this outcome measure. The patient showed improvement in their score there. The patient was able to do better at opening medications, standing, walking, buying groceries, preparing a meal. And those were things that were really, really important to her. All right, and so clinically relevant, LSVT-BIG can be provided by either physical therapy or occupational therapy, and in many instances, it can be delivered by both PT and OT within the same month. And that's one of the things that we teach therapists as part of our training course. But know that if you're a person with Parkinson's, you might benefit from both types of therapies, both physical therapy to really work on your mobility, getting out of a chair, walking, balance, etc. But occupational therapy is so important in helping to make changes related to dressing and bathing and work-related tasks, home care-related tasks, etc. Really, the sky is the limit there. So we make a great team together, and hopefully through continued research, we'll find out more about these outcome-based measures and how we can really highlight the changes that OTs make as a result of their care for people with Parkinson's and other neurological disorders. So I'm going to turn it over to Heather for a quick run through on the LSVT Loud studies.
Great. Thank you, Laura. It's such exciting work that's been done in 2020. I love hearing about the LSVT-BIG side of things. So yes, I would love to share the advances in 2020 to LSVT Loud. The first that I want to share is a new randomized control trial looking at data and specifically intelligibility. Intelligibility is that ability for somebody to clearly understand what you are saying. And so this was a randomized control trial, and what it looked at was speech production for patients with Parkinson disease that were in the randomized control trial number 3 that I talked about earlier. And this group looked at the LSVT Loud subjects, those who instead of LSVT Loud received LSVT articulation treatment, and untreated patients as well. So blinded listeners, these are listeners who did not know what type of therapy the subjects received, if they received therapy. They were transcribing one sentence selected from subjects' self-generated narrative speech. And these were presented to the listeners with background noise. It's a specific type of background noise that has been shown in the research to really simulate real-world background noise conditions. And we looked at pre to post changes in transcription accuracy. And the listeners ranged between ages 18 to 35. They had normal hearing, they were neurotypical, and were recruited via flyers and web postings. We had a total of 57 patients that were analyzed and 117 listeners included on the study. And what you'll see in the data is the graph where the percentage of intelligibility is on the y-axis of the graph, and then you'll see pre and post therapy represented on the x-axis. The LSVT Loud group is noted in blue, and you'll see that their percentage of accurate transcription of their utterances was significantly higher post-treatment. Those who received the articulation therapy are in the red dotted line, and they really didn't have a significant change in intelligibility from pre to post. And then what's also interesting is that there was a statistically significant decline in the untreated group. Just within a month, their accuracy of transcribed utterance accuracy decreased in a significant way. So really interesting work that happened out of that group, I believe at Indiana University. Another study also looked at the functional impact of intensive voice treatment, specifically LSVT loud, when using crowdsourced listeners' ratings. They really wanted to get at the what is it like when just novel, everyday listeners, maybe they aren't necessarily, speech students or have never taken a speech course or aren't speech pathologists, that these were crowdsourced using the wonders of technology. And stimuli were drawn from previously published data to see if they could replicate this data from Sapir et al. And those productions of words pre and post LSVT loud with people with Parkinson's disease were included. Samples of the words key and stew were randomly paired, and 36 naive listeners rated those samples for which was more clear. And so you'll see here on the graph where the pre-therapy is represented in the dark color, the black graphs for the word key and the word stew. You'll see the percent that was rated being clear. And in the post-therapy data, which is light gray, you see that post-therapy for both of those stimuli were significantly clearer than they were in pre-therapy. So it was a really nice replication from an outside lab, as Laura mentioned earlier, some of the robustness of the research behind the LSVT protocols is that it's not just data that's occurred within our research group, but also outside of our research groups. And looking at this crowdsourced listeners' ratings also adds another element into naive, everyday listeners being able to hear a true difference in the clarity of speech after patients undergo that 1 month of intensive treatment. We have some ongoing research building a database for automatic speech recognition in Parkinson's disease, where our Chief Scientific Officer and founder, Dr. Lorraine Ramig, Bob McDonald, who works for Google, myself, and our colleagues on the LSVT Loud and Google teams have been working together on a project known as Project Euphonia. This is a research project initiated by Google to increase the accessibility of automatic speech recognition by speakers with impaired speech that is associated with disorders such as ALS, Down syndrome, and Parkinson's disease. The project's goal is to allow these speakers with disordered speech to interact with everyday technology, such as smart devices, computers, telephones, etc. And this is in order for them to maintain their independence, their safety. For example, asking a smart device to turn on the lights to navigate a dark room is a huge safety increase for those with a movement disorder. And to enhance communication, keep them engaged. We all know, especially in this year, how important it is to be able to use technology to be connected to those that aren't in the home with us. And of course, to improve the quality of life. So Project Euphonia has a commitment to make technology work better for everyone. The first stage of that, in order to improve automatic speech recognition software, is to teach, so to speak, the algorithms to understand disordered speech. The way to teach algorithms is to collect many speech samples from those with voice and speech challenges and to integrate it into the technology so that the technology can essentially learn how to understand different speech patterns. And so we have been very fortunate to collaborate with this team at Google. Because of our over 30 years of research on speech and voice in Parkinson's disease, including gathering acoustic data, training patients to use technology, and as well as having access to a large Parkinson's disease community, our research team at LSVT Global was invited to collaborate on Project Euphonia. We are currently wrapping up the last few participants in our most recent phase of this research. This is our second official phase, really working hands-on with participants with Parkinson's disease or Parkinsonism diagnosis, and they are providing speech samples through an amazing Google platform called ChipChat, which collects the utterances and their analysis and ultimate teaching the algorithms through these speech samples. We learned in the pilot study that participation in this research can be a challenge for participants to complete independently for a variety of reasons, mostly related to technology of the platform, but also to the phenomenon that when talking to a computer within arm's reach, people often have fairly clear speech. So we've been on this wonderful journey, learning and refining a mentoring process to make the technology easy and manageable to navigate and to use and collect the speech and voice characteristics that are most helpful to teaching the algorithms of automatic speech recognition. So while our current phase wraps up and we learn more about the analysis and advancement from Google, we are looking forward to continued work on this project in 2021, and thus we continue to recruit for subjects. This is a glimpse of our recruitment flyer for perhaps patients or family members logged in today to consider, and also for our rehabilitationists to keep in mind for the clients that you treat. There are links to the interest form included in the version on the control panel of your handout. This is where the typo in the link is incorrect. But in the subsequent sent out handouts, the uploaded version that will occur online, those are corrected for. So links to the interest form are included if you want to be notified when the next phase of research opens up in the coming year. Also, since our last presentation on LSVT Loud research updates, this data on global implementation of efficacious voice treatment for Parkinson's disease has come to light. These collaborators looked at how clinicians were perceiving LSVT Loud in Germany, France, and Japan. So it truly went global. It goes beyond LSVT Loud in American English, which is super exciting. And so clinicians were polled in the following questions. The yellow on each pie chart is going to indicate that the clinicians agreed with that statement. If it's blue, solidly, it was neutral. If it's dotted, it's that they disagreed with that statement. And then there is some not specified in the lined blue happening here as well. So you'll see that across the measures of, did you receive effective training in LSVT Loud? Are you confident in your delivery of LSVT Loud? We had really great numbers for agreement. Now, when we look at Japan, which is noted with the country's flag in the upper right-hand corner of each pie graph, LSVT Loud introduction to Japan has been fairly new, and so they're still sort of getting their foothold and their confidence in this. But you'll see in the next slide that across the countries, there was good agreement for the statements of, do you have better treatment outcomes using LSVT loud than previous treatments you have used? And that yellow color indicates, yes, indeed, it has been better. And also looking at how many of your patients were satisfied with LSVT loud outcomes. And you'll see here that 50 to 100% is indicated in the yellow. So some really nice global representation of the treatment transferring beyond American English and truly in line with our global representation and our mission to go global. And so we have more references for you on updates that have occurred on LSVT loud research beyond American English. We also have more references too on updates to LSVT loud research beyond Parkinson disease for you to consider. You'll notice too that there is a text box at the bottom of this slide for an on-demand webinar that just occurred as part of a mini SLP conference that had a variety of topics. You'll notice this little text box in some of my future slides as well, just pointing your attention to some of our newest presentations that go along with the research that, that we're presenting here today. If you want more information on the references, you can go to the blog, lsvtglobal.com/research, and you'll see here that it provides a comprehensive, ongoing, continually updated reference list across LSVT loud, LSVT big. It covers topics such as technology, other populations such as Down syndrome, autism as well. So some exciting references there for you. When we look forward to future research that has become, that is underway, that is undergoing analysis right now, we are looking at our last randomized control trial data that compared LSVT loud, LSVT artic, untreated and healthy controls, and that data has just been so prolific and continues to provide lots of measures to be analyzed. Currently, speech intelligibility in noise, facial expression, swallowing, language, and PET scan imaging is underway, as well as will continue with technology-enhanced LSVT loud research and the impact of Loud for Life maintenance groups on long-term outcomes. Here on this text box at the bottom, you'll also notice, in line with the changes that RAMage is doing in the realm of language, as perhaps another carryover or spread of effects, is improved verb use following LSVT loud. So that's a pretty cool on-demand webinar if you are interested. And with that, I will hand it back over to Laura to wrap us up with some of the clinical advances that we have made in 2020 across LSVT loud and LSVT big.
All right, thanks, Heather. So as you know, it's been quite a year because of the pandemic, and it's shifted the ability to provide our traditional care that we would provide in person for persons with Parkinson's and other disorders. But thankfully, we're living in a day and age where we have technology, and we've had loosened restrictions over the last year on being able to provide LSVT big and LSVT loud via telepractice through Medicare and other funding agencies. And so it's really great because telepractice can obviously increase the accessibility to these treatments. Instead of having to come into a clinic or a facility 4 times a week for 4 weeks, really you can then receive this treatment in your home through technology. It enhances the feasibility of patients then being able to participate in something this intensive, and it helps with long-term follow-up as well. for patients with Parkinson's and other disorders, there's less of a burden, physically and mentally to take that time to come to a facility, to travel, to figure out transportation arrangements, etc. And so that's, I guess, one of the silver linings of the pandemic is it's really spurred on the growth and implementation of telepractice. The wonderful thing about LSVT Loud in particular is telepractice delivery of LSVT Loud has been studied for a number of years. You can see that the Theodorus study was all the way back in 2006 when telepractice was really in its infancy. And so LSVT Loud is really designed optimally for telepractice through use of the companion and through use of the technology that we have today for face-to-face interaction. So it's one of the only treatments in speech that has this robust data supporting that the treatment is as effective delivered via telehealth as it is if you were delivering it face-to-face or receiving it face-to-face. There's a lot that we could say. We've said a lot in the past. We've had a number of webinars for our LSVT certified clinicians. So if you're a clinician joining us today who is LSVT certified and you're interested in learning about this, but perhaps you just haven't had the time to delve in, maybe you will over the holiday break, because we have some really great on-demand webinars that relate to telepractice delivery of both LSVT Loud and LSVT-BIG. If you're a clinician who's not yet certified, or you're a person with Parkinson's or a caregiver, we also have on-demand webinars for you that gives the basics about what LSVT Loud and LSVT-BIG look like when they're delivered via telepractice, really how that works, does my insurance pay for it, kind of all those nuts and bolts questions. And then we go more in specific, talking about private practice and university clinics, what they can do, and utilizing technology. Those webinars are also found on our blog under the webinars section. And the last thing that has really changed and improved, I would say, over the last year because of the pandemic is our ability to provide post-discharge exercise classes, we'll say in the homes of people with Parkinson's that have graduated from LSVT Loud and LSVT BIG. So these programs are called Big for Life and Loud for Life, and they're exercise classes that people can engage in and do their LSVT exercises together. These are led by LSVT certified clinicians that have taken an advanced training course. And this year, LSVT Global has had so much fun developing virtual classes that we have every week and now twice a week via Zoom. If you want more information on that and how you can join in on those classes, if you're a person who has also received these treatments, contact us and we'll tell you how you can join those in this next year. So again, when we bring these exercise classes to your home, it really helps to keep people with PD active and prevent some of the implications of inactivity that can come, especially during a time like this of this pandemic when people aren't going to gyms and exercise classes like they normally would. And we have some webinars for you here to check out. And if you're an LSVT certified therapist, you can find out how to get trained through your clinician account, or you can register for this short online course through the store. So in summary, it is essential in our field of therapy practice and rehabilitation that we develop research-based treatments that are based on solid evidence and theory. However, even if you have the best model or theory in the world, there are crucial questions like, can the therapist learn how to correctly deliver the treatment? Are they able to implement it? And are patients able to participate in it? And how can we pivot in the treatment given the pandemic, but maintain the treatment fidelity? So hopefully through this webinar, you have learned the answers to some of those key questions. Now we're at the end of the webinar, and I know we're also at the top of the hour. I'm sorry we ran a little bit long. If you need to go, you are certainly free to leave, and we thank you for attending today. If you want to stay on and ask a couple of questions, Heather and I are happy to stay on and do that. You can type your question in on the control box of the question box of your control panel, or you can click on the hand icon and ask your question out loud. If you think of a question later, you can email us anytime at info@lsvtglobal.com. And while you're typing in your questions, I'll just add a little bit more information. There's lots of opportunities to learn more through our website and blog. We've mentioned the webinars many times, but there's also just a lot of good information on the website itself, on the blog. Upcoming in 2021, we'll be listing our upcoming webinars that we have once a month for the public, and we also have LSVT certified clinicians monthly as well. And then lastly, if you are on social media, we have pages on Facebook and Instagram, so please connect with us because we always make announcements there as well. Okay, and so I am going to open it up for questions right now. And this first question is, can people with Parkinson's from the UK access any of your LSVT Loud courses? Heather, do you want to take that one?
Yes, absolutely. We actually have a virtual training, I believe, in the works being planned for 2021. We also have online that are self-paced courses for training and certification as well. And so if you go to the lsvtglobal.com website and click on the tab that's for therapists, there will be a button there for obtaining your certification and training, and you can choose a virtual course, an online self-paced course. And if you have any trouble with accessing those, we're happy to help you though, and you can send an email to info@lsvtglobal.com. But we'd love to get you trained.
Yeah. And I think, Heather, she might have been talking about people with Parkinson's accessing the therapy when she said courses. And so I'll answer that bit of it too, just in case you are a person with Parkinson's. We have a clinician directory. So if you go to the website, lsvtglobal.com, you can click on the orange button at the top that says Find LSVT Clinicians, and you can type in your city and your country. So for instance, London, UK. There's also a search radius that you can expand out to 100 miles. Click on the type of therapy that you want. So in this case, you indicated that you are looking for an LSVT loud speech therapist. Once you click on that and agree to the terms, up will pop all of the individuals in your area who are LSVT loud certified. And I can't give you a number, Maria, on how many are certified, but I will tell you that the LSVT Loud course has been to the UK a number of times, and also many of the therapists over there take the training online, as Heather was speaking about. So look on there because there's a good chance there is one in your area that you can reach out to via email or phone and see if they're currently providing the treatment. If you can't find one, email us at info@lsvtglobal.com because sometimes we can do a deeper search on the back end to try to find a clinician near you. Bottom line, the answer is yes, there are LSVT Loud and LSVT-BIG certified therapists in the UK, and we'd love to help you find one. Okay, I think right now I don't see any other questions coming in, and so maybe just to respect everyone's time, we'll close the webinar. I did want to let you know that I added the LSVT-BIG complete references at the end here, so you'll find those in your handout as well in case you want to look up those references and read the whole studies yourself because they are quite interesting. But until then, we say thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you all have a wonderful end to your 2020, and we wish you all the best for a bright and healthy 2021. And thank you as well, Heather, for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Bye-bye.